Before I tell you this story, let me share something personal with you. There are very few people in this world who remind us what it means to be truly human, and Keanu Reeves is one of them. He has faced unimaginable loss. He lost his best friend, his daughter, and the love of his life. Yet through all that pain, he never became bitter. He never stopped being kind. He gives away millions quietly. He rides the subway like everyone else. He treats every person with the same gentle respect. Keanu Reeves inspires me because he proves that success does not have to change who you are, and pain does not have to harden your heart. This story is inspired by that very spirit. It is about two men from different worlds, a single act of kindness that echoed across 15 years, and a handshake that would change everything. Stay with me until the very end. The air inside the rooftop bar felt different that night. Something had shifted, though no one could say exactly what or why. The golden lights above the counter flickered gently, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Sandra Chen sat alone at the bar, her fingers wrapped loosely around a glass she had barely touched. She was not sure why her heart felt heavy in that moment. Nothing had happened yet. But something deep inside her whispered to pay attention, to stay present, to notice what was about to unfold. Sandra was a Korean-American documentary filmmaker in her early 30s. She had flown to Seoul 3 weeks ago with one mission. She wanted to tell the untold stories of people living in the shadows, the ones no camera ever found, the ones no headline ever named. Tonight she carried a small hidden camera in her bag. You never know when a real story walks into the room, she often told herself. The bar was called the Jade Moon, sitting on the 32nd floor of an old building in Gangnam, hidden from public view. The walls were dark wood, the windows stretched floor to ceiling, and Seoul glittered below like a sea of fallen stars. It was the kind of place where powerful people came to disappear. Sandra barely noticed when a man sat 2 seats away from her. He was tall with a thick beard and simple glasses. He wore a plain dark jacket and kept his head lowered, as if wanting to blend into the walls around him. Something about him felt strangely familiar, but she could not place it. He ordered whiskey, thanked the bartender quietly, and stared at the city lights without saying another word. He seemed tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something invisible for a very long time. Sandra did not know it yet, but she was sitting just 2 seats away from Keanu Reeves. Then the atmosphere changed again. This time everyone in the room felt it. The door opened and a wave of cold silence swept through the bar. Sandra saw the bartender freeze for just a second. 2 businessmen near the window looked down at their drinks. She turned toward the entrance and saw him, Park Jin Woo. Power surrounded him like a second skin. He wore a long black coat and walked with the slow confidence of a man who had never been told no. Behind him, 4 men in dark suits followed in perfect silence. They were his shadows. Sandra had heard the stories about Jin Woo. Everyone in Seoul had. He controlled a vast network of businesses, both legal and illegal. Some called him a monster. Others called him a necessary evil. The rumors said he rose from nothing, a poor immigrant who returned from America with nothing but rage in his heart. He built his empire with blood and silence. Sandra reached into her bag and pressed record on her hidden camera. This was exactly the story she came to Seoul to find. Jin Woo walked deeper into the bar, his cold eyes scanning every face. Then he stopped. His gaze had landed on the quiet man with the beard and glasses. Sandra watched as his expression changed. It was subtle but unmistakable. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed with something that looked almost like recognition. Slowly, he began walking toward them. Sandra's heart pounded in her chest. The man beside her still had not looked up. He had no idea what was coming. Jin Woo stopped directly in front of him. The bodyguards formed a half-circle behind their boss. The entire bar held its breath. Jin Woo spoke, his voice low and steady. "You," he said, "I know exactly who you are." The quiet man finally lifted his head. For a long moment, the 2 men simply stared at each other in complete silence. Sandra could not move. She could not breathe. She had no idea what connection or dark history these 2 men might share. But deep in her bones, she felt something powerful stirring, and she knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The silence between the 2 men felt like a living thing. It pressed against the walls of the bar and wrapped around every person in the room. Sandra could hear her own heartbeat echoing inside her chest. She watched Jin Woo standing there, his dark eyes fixed on the quiet stranger beside her. The bodyguards had not moved. Their hands hovered near their jackets, ready for any command. The bartender had disappeared somewhere behind the counter. Even the golden lights above seemed to dim, as if the room itself was afraid of what might happen next. Jin Woo tilted his head slowly, studying the man before him. "You changed your appearance," he said in a calm voice, "but I could never forget your face." The quiet man finally lowered his glasses and looked directly at Jin Woo. For a brief moment, Sandra saw something pass between them. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something far more complicated, something neither of them could name. The stranger spoke softly. "I think you might have me confused with someone else." His voice was gentle and humble, carrying no trace of arrogance or pride. Jin Woo let out a slow breath and shook his head. "No," he replied. "I have spent 15 years remembering every detail of your face. I know exactly who you are, Keanu Reeves." Sandra felt her stomach drop. She turned sharply and looked at the man sitting beside her. The beard, the glasses, the simple dark jacket, it all made sense now. This quiet stranger who had been sipping whiskey alone was one of the most famous actors in the world. But why was a Korean crime boss so desperate to find him? What possible history could they share? Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, but she stayed perfectly still. Her hidden camera was still recording. Keanu did not react with surprise or alarm. He simply nodded gently and spoke again. "All right," he said, "you know who I am. But I am sorry, I do not remember meeting you." There was no arrogance in his words, only honesty. Jin Woo closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression. The coldness was still there, but beneath it, Sandra could see the faintest trace of pain. Then Jin Woo began to speak, and his voice carried the weight of a memory he had buried for 15 long years. "In 2009, he said, I was not the man you see before you now. I was 23 years old, working as a dishwasher in a small Korean restaurant in Los Angeles. I had no money, no family nearby, and no hope. My mother was dying in a hospital back in Seoul. The doctors said she had only weeks to live. I needed to fly home to see her one last time, but I could not afford the ticket. I had nothing." Jin Woo paused and took a slow breath before continuing. "One night I sat outside the restaurant after my shift ended. I could not stop crying. I felt like the entire world had abandoned me. I was alone in a country that did not care whether I lived or died. And then a stranger sat down beside me on that cold bench." Keanu's expression changed. His eyes softened as the memory slowly returned to him. Sandra watched as recognition flickered across his face. Jin Woo continued speaking. "That stranger did not ask my name. He did not ask what I had done to deserve such pain. He simply sat with me in silence for a long time. Then he asked me one question: 'What do you need right now?' I told him the truth," Jin Woo said. "I told him my mother was dying and I could not afford to see her." The stranger nodded quietly. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, and placed it in my hands. Inside was $3,000 in cash. Before I could say anything, he stood up and walked away. But he left a small note inside the envelope. I have carried that note with me every single day since." Sandra felt tears forming in her eyes. She looked at Keanu, who sat completely still, his head bowed slightly. Jin Woo reached slowly into his jacket. The bodyguards tensed immediately. Sandra gripped the edge of the bar, her knuckles turning white. But what Jin Woo pulled out was not a weapon. It was a worn and folded piece of paper, its edges soft from years of handling. He held it like it was the most precious thing he had ever owned. "This is the note you gave me," Jin Woo said, his voice breaking for the first time. "And tonight, after 15 years of searching, I finally found you." Keanu slowly reached out and took the worn piece of paper from Jin Woo's hands. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded it with great care. Sandra leaned closer, her heart pounding, desperate to see what words had been carried across 15 years and thousands of miles. The note was simple, written in faded black ink. "Go see your mother," it read. "Kindness always finds its way back." Keanu stared at his own handwriting for a long moment. The memory had fully returned to him now, and with it came a wave of emotion he had not expected. "I remember you," Keanu said softly. "I remember that night. You were sitting alone in the cold, and your pain was so deep I could feel it just by standing near you. I did not know your name, I did not know your story, but I knew you needed help and I had the ability to give it. So I did." Keanu looked up at Jin Woo with gentle eyes. "I never expected anything in return. I just hoped you made it home in time." Jin Woo nodded slowly, and for the first time Sandra saw tears forming in his eyes. "I made it," he said. "I held my mother's hand in that hospital room. The doctors were wrong. She did not die in weeks. She fought for 7 more years. She lived long enough to meet my daughter. She lived long enough to see me become a father. And it was all because of you." Keanu shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "It was because of her strength and your love. I only gave you a plane ticket. You gave her a reason to keep fighting." Sandra wiped her own eyes quietly. She had filmed many powerful moments in her career, but nothing had ever compared to this. Two men from completely different worlds, standing face to face, connected by a single act of kindness that had rippled across time and space. Jin Woo extended his hand slowly. Keanu looked at it for a moment, then reached out and clasped it firmly. But the handshake transformed into something deeper. Jin Woo pulled Keanu forward and wrapped his arms around him in a full embrace. The most feared man in Seoul's underworld was weeping openly in the arms of a Hollywood actor. The bodyguard stood frozen in disbelief. The few remaining guests in the bar watched in stunned silence. Sandra could barely breathe. Her hidden camera captured every second. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They simply held each other, two strangers who had shared one brief encounter 15 years ago, now reunited by fate in the most unlikely of places. When they finally stepped apart, Jin Woo wiped his eyes and let out a slow breath. "I have waited so long for this moment," he said. "I built everything I have searching for you. I became powerful so that one day I could find you and repay my debt." Keanu placed a gentle hand on Jin Woo's shoulder. "You owe me nothing," he said. "But if you truly want to honor that moment, then pass the kindness forward. Help someone else the way I helped you. That is the only repayment I will ever accept." Jin Woo stared at him in silence, and Sandra could see something shifting behind his eyes. It was as if Keanu's words had unlocked a door that had been sealed shut for years. But before Jin Woo could respond, one of his bodyguards stepped forward urgently. He whispered something into Jin Woo's ear, and the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Jin Woo's expression hardened. His jaw tightened. He turned to face his men with cold fury in his eyes. Sandra felt fear rising in her chest. Something was very wrong. Jin Woo spoke in a low voice. "How long do we have?" The bodyguard replied quietly. 10 minutes, maybe less. They know you are here. They are coming with everything they have." Sandra did not fully understand what was happening, but she understood enough. Rivals had discovered Jin Woo's location. Danger was approaching fast. She looked at Keanu, expecting to see fear on his face, but he remained calm and still. Jin Woo turned back to Keanu with a conflicted expression. "I have to go," he said. "There are people coming for me, and if they find you here, they will not hesitate to hurt you." Keanu shook his head firmly. "I am not leaving," he replied. "Not until I know you are safe." Jin Woo stared at him in disbelief. Then slowly a strange calm settled over his face. He looked at the worn note still resting in Keanu's hand, and something inside him seemed to break open. He made a decision in that moment, and it would change everything. Jin Woo turned to face his bodyguards, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight none of them had ever heard before. "Tonight," he said slowly, "no blood will be spilled. Not by my hand, not in my name, not ever again." The bodyguards exchanged confused glances. One of them stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir," he said, "they are coming for you. If we do not fight, they will destroy everything you have built." Jin Woo shook his head calmly. "Then let them destroy it," he replied. "I am done building my life on fear and violence. I am done being the man I became just to survive." Sandra watched in disbelief as Jin Woo removed his long black coat and laid it gently over a chair. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He called the police. He gave them his exact location and told them everything. He told them about his organization, his rivals, and the danger that was approaching. He told them he was ready to turn himself in. When he ended the call, his bodyguards stood frozen in stunned silence. One of them asked quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Jin Woo looked at the worn note still resting in Keanu's hand and smiled softly. "Because 15 years ago," he said, "a stranger showed me that kindness was possible even in the darkest moments. I buried that lesson under years of anger and ambition. But tonight I finally understand what it means." Keanu stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Jin Woo's shoulder. "This is the bravest thing you have ever done," he said quietly. Jin Woo nodded slowly. I was so focused on repaying you, he replied, that I forgot the real lesson of your gift. You did not help me so I could become powerful. You helped me so I could become kind. And I failed that lesson for 15 years, but not anymore. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. The police arrived before Jin Woo's rivals could reach the bar. They took him into custody peacefully, and he cooperated fully with every question. Sandra watched from a distance as the most feared man in Seoul walked calmly into a police car without resistance. Keanu stood beside her in silence, his expression thoughtful and sad. She finally found the courage to speak. "Why did you help him?" she asked softly. "You did not even know who he was that night in Los Angeles." Keanu turned to look at her with gentle eyes. "That is exactly why I helped him," he replied. "I did not need to know his name or his story. I just needed to see that he was suffering. Kindness does not require a reason. It only requires a choice." Sandra felt tears streaming down her face. She realized in that moment that her entire understanding of the world had shifted. She had come to Seoul looking for darkness, but instead she had found light. 6 months passed. Jin Woo kept his promise. He became a government witness and helped dismantle his entire organization from the inside. He provided evidence that led to dozens of arrests and exposed corruption at every level. In exchange for his cooperation, he received a reduced sentence and was placed in a rehabilitation program. But more importantly, he used his own money to create a foundation for former gang members who wanted to leave the life behind. He called it the Second Chance Project. Sandra finished her documentary and named it The Handshake. It premiered at an international film festival and won 3 major awards. Critics called it a masterpiece of human connection. Viewers around the world watched 2 men from opposite sides of life come together through a single act of kindness. The documentary went viral, and millions of people shared the story across every platform. Sandra received thousands of messages from people who said the film had changed their lives. Some said it inspired them to forgive old enemies. Others said it gave them courage to seek redemption for their own mistakes. Keanu attended the premiere in Seoul. The theater was filled with people who had traveled from around the world just to hear him speak. When the film ended, the audience sat in tearful silence. A reporter in the front row asked Keanu what he remembered about that night in Los Angeles 15 years ago. Keanu smiled softly and answered in his gentle voice. "I do not remember the money," he said. "I just remember a young man who loved his mother. That love was worth more than anything I could ever give." 3 months later, Sandra received an invitation to a private ceremony outside Seoul. She traveled to a quiet hillside cemetery where cherry blossoms drifted gently through the morning air. Jin Woo was there with his daughter, a beautiful girl of 12 years old with bright, curious eyes. Keanu stood beside them in respectful silence. They had gathered at the grave of Jin Woo's mother, the woman whose survival had started everything. Jin Woo's daughter stepped forward and placed a small bouquet of white flowers on the grave. Then she unfolded a piece of paper and began to read aloud. "Go see your mother," she said in a clear voice. "Kindness always finds its way back." She looked up at her father with tears in her eyes. "Grandmother lived because of these words," she said softly, "and you changed because of them too." Jin Woo knelt beside his daughter and held her close. "I was lost for a very long time," he whispered, "but I found my way back. Because someone believed I was worth saving, even when I did not believe it myself." Keanu watched them quietly, and Sandra captured the moment on her camera. The sunlight filtered through the cherry blossoms and painted everything in soft shades of pink and gold. It was a scene of perfect peace, a moment of healing that had taken 15 years to arrive. Jin Woo stood slowly and turned to face Keanu one last time. He extended his hand, and Keanu clasped it firmly. This time the handshake was not filled with shock or disbelief. It was filled with gratitude, respect, and a bond that would never be broken. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to carry one lesson with you. Kindness is never wasted. It does not matter if the person you help is a stranger. It does not matter if you never see them again. Every act of compassion sends ripples across time and space, touching lives you will never know, changing futures you cannot imagine. Keanu Reeves did not save Jin Woo because he expected something in return. He saved him because he saw a human being in pain and chose to act. That choice, that single moment of selfless love, echoed across 15 years and transformed 2 lives forever. We live in a world that often rewards cruelty and celebrates power. But true strength is not found in dominance or control. True strength is found in humility, in kindness, in the courage to help someone without asking for anything back. Jin Woo spent years building an empire of fear, but he found peace only when he chose compassion over revenge. He found redemption only when he decided to become the kind of person who lifts others up instead of pushing them down. So I ask you this. What kind of person do you want to be? What ripples do you want to send into the world? You do not need money or fame or power to make a difference. You only need an open heart and a willingness to see the humanity in everyone you meet. The next time you encounter someone who is suffering, remember this story. Remember that your kindness could echo across 15 years. Remember that the stranger beside you might be carrying a pain you cannot see. And remember that one small act of love might be the very thing that saves their life. Kindness always finds its way back. That is the lesson of the handshake. That is the legacy of two men who met twice across 15 years and proved that compassion is the most powerful force in the world. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. May this story live in your heart and inspire you to be the light that someone else needs today.